before there were words, before there were stories, before even the stars had settled into their timeless dance, there was sound. And from that sound, music was born, an ancient breath, a pulse beneath the surface of the world. Long, long ago, before memory and myth took root, the earth itself hummed softly. Winds whispered through canyons. Raindrops tapped leaves in playful rhythms, and the sea lapped gently at the shores like a lullaby of the planet. Early humans, nestled in caves or beneath the open sky, would listen. And somewhere, perhaps without realizing, someone began to echo those sounds, maybe through a hollowed reed, or by tapping stones together, letting the heartbeat of nature become something more, something chosen, something shared. And so the first music wasn't composed, it was discovered. It drifted into being on the breath of wind, wrapped in firelight, echoed in footsteps across vast plains. A hum to soothe a child, a chant to welcome the dawn. Music was not a performance then. It was presence, connection, ritual. A way to hold memory in the air, to bridge the visible and the invisible. Over time, the earliest humans shaped simple tools, flutes made from bird bones, drums from hollowed logs and stretched skin. These were not instruments as we know them today, but voices of their own, each carved with care, imbued with reverence. Across Africa, in valleys and deserts, rhythms grew bold and complex. In the frozen north, lullabies whispered over snowdrifts. In every corner of the ancient world, music stirred awake. In Mesopotamia, among the ziggurats and riverbanks, scribes etched cuneiform symbols into clay tablets, some of the earliest known records of music. The Sumerians praised gods with lyres and harps, while priestesses sang to the rising sun. The air shimmered with ritual tones intended to move not just humans, but the heavens themselves. Farther west in Egypt, music blossomed in the temples of the Nile. Harps curved like crescent moons sang in ceremonies. Flutes played in markets and at feasts, and dancers swayed to beats measured by handclaps and sistrums. Every note was a dialogue with the divine, with ancestors, with the turning of time. And then across the sea in ancient Greece, music became muse. The very word music comes from the muses' divine sisters who inspired poetry, dance, and melody. The Greeks believed music shaped the soul, and philosophers like Pythagoras spoke of the music of the spheres, where even the planets moved in harmony, their orbits an inaudible, celestial song. Lyres rang in open courtyards. Aulos reeds danced with breath. Epic tales were sung, not spoken, their cadence committing history and heroism to memory. For the Greeks, to learn music was to learn how to live well, balanced, beautiful, and in tune with the cosmos. As empires rose and fell, music traveled, two carried on the winds of trade whispered by travelers, carved into stone, remembered in lullabies. In ancient China, the air was alive with bells and zithers, each tone mapped to seasons and emotions. In India, ragas painted the hours, each scale a universe in miniature, blooming in the hands of sages and dreamers. From these sacred beginnings, the world's music began to swell, not yet a storm, but a gathering breeze. A promise. A prelude. And as night deepens around you and the echoes of these ancient harmonies settle gently in the air, the story is only beginning. As we drift onward, following the currents of sound through the folds of time, in Rome, music held a dignified place, but it was different than in Greece. The grandeur of the empire demanded ceremony marches, fanfares, signals that moved armies, and marked the passing of emperors. Though the Romans borrowed much from the Greeks, they transformed music into something more formal, more utilitarian. Still, in the echo of amphitheaters and banquets, melodies twirled. Festive songs mingled with solemn odes. Music was alive, if quieter now, like a flame shielded from the wind. And then, when Rome fell into ruin, and the lights of the classical world dimmed, music did not vanish. It retreated. It whispered into monasteries, into the voices of monks wrapped in robes and silence. This was the dawn of the medieval era, a time when the world seemed to grow darker, but music found a new kind of light. Within the high arches of monasteries, Gregorian chant was born. Imagine long corridors of stone-flickering candles, and voices rising not in performance, but in devotion. These chants were simple, unaccompanied, flowing like rivers of prayer through vast, quiet halls. They were sung in Latin, without harmony, without rhythm as we know it. Just one melodic line stretching onward, guiding hearts towards something eternal. For centuries, these sacred songs were the foundation of Western music. But slowly, quietly, something began to change. New ideas stirred. Curious minds began to explore not just the soul of music, but its structure. What if two voices could sing at once different notes held together by invisible threads? What if sound could be measured, written, passed on? In time, Polyphony emerged, multiple melodies entwining like vines around a trellis. The music of the 12th and 13th centuries began to bloom ornate and layered like the great stained glass windows of Chartres and Notre Dame. The world was waking up again, and music was waking with it. Outside the monasteries, minstrels and troubadours wandered. They carried lutes and harps, and in their verses lived the laughter and longing of ordinary people. They sang of courtly love, of knights and roses, of joy and farewell. These traveling musicians brought songs from town to town, their voices the lifeblood of folk traditions that still echo in the shadows of time. By the 14th century, music began to breathe with even more color and complexity. The Ars Nova, or new art took root in France, where composers like Michaud crafted intricate tapestries of rhythm and harmony. For the first time, music was not just sacred or folk, it was art in its own right. Composers signed their works. Notes were written on parchment. A musical identity was beginning to form. And so, through those centuries of cloisters and candlelight, music grew still humble, still reverent, but reaching out now with tentative fingers toward the brilliance of what lay ahead. Night falls a little deeper now, and with it we leave the last echoes of medieval chants behind. The Renaissance waits on the horizon, glowing faintly, ready to lift the veil of silence with 1,000 radiant sounds. As dawn began to glow gently over the world, once more, the Renaissance unfolded like a blooming garden after a long and hushed winter. And with it came a reawakening of wonder, a thirst for beauty, and a newfound desire to understand the mysteries of the universe not only through prayer, but through reason, exploration, and music. This was an age of rediscovery, where forgotten manuscripts of ancient Greece and Rome were pulled from dusty shelves and read anew. Artists sculpted and painted with a reverence for the human form. Poets wrote of nature, of longing of the stars. And in this great revival of human thought, music, too, found a new voice, one filled with balance, clarity, and sublime grace. Imagine choirs of shimmering voices in candlelit chapels, each note carefully crafted, each harmony gliding smoothly beside another. This was the golden sound of Renaissance polyphony, with composers like Josquin des Prez and Palestrina, weaving melodies so delicate they seemed to hover in midair. Their music was not bound by earthly time. It floated like prayer, turned into song, breathing serenity into sacred spaces. In this era, the printing press changed everything. Suddenly, music could be written, copied, and shared far and wide. Composers no longer had to rely on memory or the hands of scribes. Their works could travel across kingdoms and centuries, carried on sheets of ink and paper like feathered birds in flight. Music moved beyond the walls of the church, stepping gracefully into courts and salons. The lute became a favored companion, its soft voice perfect for love songs and introspection. Madrigals, songs of love. Nature and wit sprang to life in Italy and England, sung in gardens under soft twilight skies, filled with laughter and longing. But just as music found stillness and symmetry in the Renaissance, a storm of passion began to stir on the horizon. The world was changing. The telescope had opened the heavens. New lands had been mapped. Old beliefs were being questioned. And music, ever sensitive to the heartbeat of its time, began to change too. The Baroque era emerged not with a whisper, but with a flourish. Music grew bolder, more expressive, filled with ornament and contrast. It was no longer just a reflection of harmony in the universe. It was drama. It was story. It was soul. In the early 1600s, a new invention began to appear in candlelit theaters opera. Here was something never heard before. Music married to drama characters, singing their joys and griefs orchestras, painting the scenery with sound. Monteverdi led the way, and soon the genre blossomed into a world of gods and mortals. Kings and courtesans, love and betrayal, all lifted into the air on waves of melody. In churches and royal courts, great masters rose, Johann Sebastian Bach, whose music seemed carved from the breath of the divine itself. Fugues and cantatas like cathedrals of sound, their architecture intricate yet perfectly natural. Handel, whose soaring choruses filled halls with glory and triumph. Vivaldi, who painted the seasons not in oils but in violins and harpsichords, letting us hear the rustle of leaves, the crash of storms, the hush of winter's snow. It was a time when music did not merely accompany life, it narrated it. Grand, golden, resplendent. And yet, even in this radiant age, whispers of change stirred. Tastes shifted. The world turned its ear toward something new, something simpler, lighter, more graceful. The classical era was waiting just beyond the horizon where form and elegance would again take center stage. And so gently now we float onward into an age of powdered wigs and candlelit symphonies where genius and grace walked hand in hand. The classical era arrived like a soft breeze after a thunderstorm, cool, clear, and composed. It was a time when music sought order and elegance, a mirror to the ideals of the Enlightenment, when philosophers dreamed of reason and symmetry, and kings commissioned concerts in golden halls. Gone was the extravagant swirl of the Baroque. In its place, melodies flowed with poised simplicity, like a gentle stream over polished stones. The music of this age did not demand attention, it invited it. Balanced phrases, predictable cadences, and refined beauty defined a new aesthetic. Music now lived not only in churches and palaces, but in drawing rooms and concert halls open to wider audiences, echoing the soft shift in society. It was during this age that some of the most luminous names in music emerged, stars so bright that their names still shimmer across time. Joseph Haydn, often called the father of the symphony, brought light and wit to orchestral music. He wrote with charm, with curiosity, and always with an ear for structure, each note falling into place like a well-set jewel. His string quartets whispered secrets between friends. His symphonies, though grand, carried a twinkle of joy and invention. And then there was Mozart, child prodigy, eternal genius. From the moment he placed his fingers on a keyboard, it was as if music flowed through him, effortless and divine. His melodies danced with laughter, wept with tenderness, and glittered with grace. In his operas, characters breathed with humanity, mischievous noble broken in love. Each note seemed to shimmer with purpose, as though the universe had stopped just long enough for something perfect to be heard. But even as the classical age sought balance and harmony, life, as always, was changing. Revolutions burned through Europe. Empires crumbled and rose again. The world was awakening to new ideas about freedom, about individuality, about the storms that lived within the soul. And so, at the turning point between two centuries, there stood a single figure, bold, defiant, and filled with fire. Ludwig van Beethoven. He was born in the classical mold, tutored in the traditions of Haydn and Mozart. But inside him roared something wild, something that could not be contained by elegance alone. Beethoven took music and tore away its lace and satin. He gave it thunder. He gave it shadows. He gave it soul. His symphonies did not politely entertain, they surged and battled, whispered and wept. The Eroica, the Fifth, the Ninth. These were not just compositions. They were declarations. Through them, Beethoven gave voice to triumph over adversity, to longing to hope. And perhaps most wondrous of all, he composed his greatest works even after silence had claimed his hearing. Deaf to the world, but not to music, he composed from within his mind a vast cathedral where the notes rang loud and clear. With Beethoven, the classical age gave way to something more intimate, more intense, more human. The Romantic era had begun where music would no longer simply reflect the world. It would explore the heart, the imagination, the dream. And so we drift now into that dream a century of composers who wore their hearts on their sleeves, who conjured magic from orchestras and pianos, who turned emotion into melody. Let us follow them into forests of longing and moonlit sonatas, where every note is a sigh and every silence holds a secret. The Romantic era arrived not with the order of form, but with the chaos of feeling. It was a time when music reached inward, searching the soul for the deepest longings and loftiest dreams. No longer content to sit politely within rules, composers of this age painted with broad strokes of emotion, grief and joy, terror and love, all bound within sweeping symphonies and tender nocturnes. In this world, every note became a confession. Frédéric Chopin, the quiet poet of the piano, poured his soul into delicate mazurkas and flowing nocturnes. His music was like a sigh in the night, or the memory of a dream that lingers just before waking. In his melodies we hear homesickness, tenderness, and the faint heartbeat of distant Poland. He rarely performed in grand halls. Instead, his music seemed made for twilight salons, candlelight, and solitude. Meanwhile, in the windswept valleys of Bohemia, Antonin Dvořák listened to the songs of the people, folk tunes carried on the breeze, earthy rhythms from village dances, and he wove them into glowing symphonies. In Germany, Johannes Brahms stood tall with his stormy beard and steadfast heart, crafting music both noble and nostalgic, forever dancing in the shadow of Beethoven. And then came Franz Liszt, the magician of the piano, whose fingers seemed to summon fire and thunder. He dazzled audiences with his brilliance, yet beneath the spectacle was deep, restless yearning. He was both rock star and monk, a soul torn between worldly glory and spiritual stillness. In Russia, Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky painted passion in full color. His ballets, Swan Lake, The Nutcracker, Sleeping Beauty were not just dances, but fairy tales, spun from music filled with longing, sorrow, and sudden bursts of joy. His symphonies spoke of struggle of fate, knocking at the door of love that cannot be. But Romanticism was not bound to one country or one voice. It sang across borders. In Italy, Giuseppe Verdi gave us operas where voices soared like eagles, love, death, rebellion, all sung beneath chandeliers. In Germany, Richard Wagner created epic soundscapes of gods and heroes, his operas flowing like endless rivers of myth. He called them music dramas, and they swelled with grandeur, stretching time itself. Composers wandered into new lands, new scales, and exotic harmonies. They sought inspiration in poetry and paintings, in the landscapes of faraway places. Music became a story, a journey, a memory. Yet even as Romanticism rose to its passionate heights, the world outside was changing again. Cities grew taller, faster. Industry roared. The air shimmered with electricity. The old certainties trembled, and the 20th century waited unpredictable and wild. And the music, it too would transform. It would question itself. It would splinter and spark. But before we leave the dream of the Romantic era behind, let us pause in this twilight moment, a lingering chord, a final echo in a quiet room. Because from here on, music would not be one voice, but many. It would speak in fragments, in whispers and shouts, in strange new languages born of a world reshaped. Soon we'll cross into that bold new realm. But for now, rest in the golden embers of this age of feeling, where every melody was a heartbeat and every silence a breath. As the 20th century dawned, the old world blinked and shifted. Horse-drawn carriages gave way to automobiles. Electric lights chased shadows from city streets. Airplanes scratched the sky with trails of wonder. And music, once tethered to tradition, began to tremble, then leap into the unknown. No longer bound to the sweet resolutions of the past composers, now asked daring questions. What is beauty? What is harmony? Can silence sing? Can noise become music? In Paris, Claude Debussy conjured sounds like water reflecting moonlight, his music fluid, elusive, full of shimmering colors. Clair de Lune, soft as silver mist, drifts over the piano like a dream too delicate to hold. He did not follow the rules of old. He whispered with impression, hinting at images rather than declaring them. Not far behind him came Maurice Ravel, whose music sparkled with both elegance and surprise. His bolero pulsing forward like a hypnotic march through time itself. But even as Impressionism floated gently, other forces stirred more violently. In Vienna, Arnold Schoenberg shattered the comfortable world of tonality, embracing dissonance, letting a tonality bloom where harmony once reigned. He and those who followed him saw music not as a garden of flowers, but as a laboratory of sound. To some, it was madness. To others, brilliance. Either way, the air was never quite the same again. While Europe wrestled with revolution and abstraction, America, young and vibrant, began to hum its own melodies, syncopated, playful, full of life. In the smoky clubs of New Orleans, a new sound was born: jazz. It came from struggle and joy, from African rhythms, and blues hollers from the clatter of cities and the pulse of human resilience. Jazz was freedom. Musicians like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington turned improvisation into poetry, their horns and pianos telling stories that could never be written the same way twice. And there, in the buzzing heart of the 20th century, music began to multiply. It splintered into 1,000 paths, each one vibrant, alive, and true to its time. Classical composers embraced chaos, rhythm, and experimentation. Igor Stravinsky shook the world with The Rite of Spring, its primal energy causing riots in concert halls, its rhythms sharp as flint. John Cage composed silence, asking with a quiet smile whether even nothing could be music. And minimalist voices like Philip Glass and Steve Reich painted patterns in repetition, each cycle shifting like light through turning glass. At the same time, across radios and record stores, a different revolution unfolded. The blues, born of sorrow and survival, drifted northward from the cotton fields. With it came a cry so raw it carved its way into rock and soul. In smoky bars, guitar strings bent with longing. And then, in Memphis, in Liverpool, in London, and New York, the youth found their voice. Rock and roll erupted wild and full of fire. It was not careful or composed. It was heart and rhythm. It was Elvis, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin voices like lightning caught in human form. The world danced, swayed, rebelled. Music became the anthem of a generation of protest and peace signs, of Woodstock and war. From there, the river widened. Genres blossomed: soul, disco, punk, hip-hop, electronic. Technology reshaped everything. Synthesizers and samplers, drum machines and digital recordings, all gave birth to new frontiers. Music no longer needed a grand hall. It needed only a bedroom, a microphone, and a dream. And still through it all, through every shift and tremble, music remained the heartbeat of the human story. It changed shapes, yes, but it never ceased to echo our deepest truths, our desire to connect, to feel, to remember. We are nearing the present now, and the story is almost full, but not yet finished. Let us rest a little longer before we arrive in the world of streaming clouds and algorithmic rhythms, a world where all music from all time exists, waiting just a breath away. And so we arrive at the threshold of our own time, a world humming with invisible waves, where music drifts from pockets and speakers, ever present, ever changing. It is a world in which all the songs of the past have been folded into the present, digitized, and streamed into existence with a single tap. The journey of music, once long and winding, now feels like a vast circle, a spiral that touches every era at once. In this modern age, music is no longer confined by borders or traditions. It travels faster than thought, gliding across continents through fiber and air. A lullaby sung in Nairobi can find its echo in Sao Paulo. A beat created in Seoul may pulse through headphones in Berlin within seconds. We live in a time of infinite access, and yet the desire remains the same: to feel, to connect, to remember. The 21st century is a patchwork of sounds. Genres blend and blur. Pop becomes infused with rap dances with R&B. R&B finds its shimmer in electronic textures. Artists draw inspiration from every corner of history, sampling gospel choirs, Baroque strings, ancient chants. The past is no longer a memory, it is an instrument. Voices rise in every language, telling stories both personal and universal. Billie Eilish whispers secrets wrapped in synths and shadow. Kendrick Lamar weaves verses of pain and power. Taylor Swift pens diaries in melodies. BTS sings of youth and hope. Their audiences stretch across oceans and time zones, all bound by invisible threads of rhythm and resonance. Even the way we listen has changed. Once music came in physical form: a vinyl disc, a cassette, a CD, each held in hands and placed with care. Now it flows unseen, summoned by code and cloud. Playlists tailor themselves to moods. Algorithms predict our longing. And yet the magic remains, that feeling when a song understands you better than words ever could. Technology, too, has become a collaborator. Artificial intelligence hums quietly in the background, composing, harmonizing, learning. Musicians are no longer limited by what hands can play now. Even the imagined can be rendered into sound. Still, the heart of music beats with the same timeless rhythm: human curiosity, human feeling. There is a soft irony here, a quiet wonder. For all the grandeur of orchestras, the chants of temples, the street corners of jazz and rebellion, the story of music circles back to where it began. To a simple tune, a breath, a heartbeat, the need to sing what cannot be spoken. As we drift into the final notes of this journey, let us remember music is not just something we hear. It is something we are. It lives in lullabies whispered by tired mothers, in chants passed down through generations, in the soft strum of a guitar by the fireside, in the pulse beneath our skin when we dance. The history of music is not finished. It never will be. Because as long as there are hearts that beat, voices that rise, feet that move, music will find its way. It will adapt, evolve, and return. A spiral without end. A song without final measure. So close your eyes now, and let silence hold you like the last note of a lullaby. The music may rest for a moment, but its echo surrounds you still. Sleep well, dear listener. The story will sing on.